Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gary Levinson. I am the Artistic Director of the Chamber Music Society of Fort Worth, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to our pre-concert talk. Today is one of the most remarkable concerts and therefore pre-concert talks that we've ever had at the Chamber Music Society. One of the most important reasons is we have a living composer. Not only is this a commissioned piece, just like you see behind me, but we have a living composer, which we'll get to in a moment. But I also wanted to welcome our online audience because this is being recorded for our YouTube channel. We have an educational series called Learning with the Masters. Many of you have attended. And when you watch it the next time, you'll see that our introduction and our talk with Mr. Jalbert and with Laurie Shulman will be part of that educational series. So I'm really excited about that. Now, without further ado, let me welcome Laurie Shulman, my partner in crime for these pre-concert talks.
Thank you, Gary, and good afternoon, everyone. In addition to the fact that yesterday we welcomed in spring with the vernal equinox, I would like to point out to you that today is another very special day. Those of you who tuned in WRR this morning already know this. It's Bach's birthday. He's 346 today. And I have it on very good authority that his music continues to inspire and is living vibrantly in music rooms, concert halls throughout the world. And we're delighted to include our celebration of Bach's birthday today, and so glad that you can be here with us for it. I would also like to draw to your attention that because we have the composer with us, we are not discussing the works in program order. We're going to talk about the opening work, and then we're going to talk about the Mozart, and then we'll introduce Pierre and bring him to the front, since it is such a special privilege to have him with us today. But first, we are going to explore the music of a Polish woman whom most of you have probably never heard of, Grażyna Bacewicz. And her music has just been a revelation to me. I had heard her name and I was familiar with a couple of her orchestral pieces. This was the first time I was exposed to her chamber music, and I was just enchanted with this quartet. It's a remarkable work. She was a violinist, so she certainly knew how to write for strings. And you'll see from the program page, this was her fourth string quartet. She was no novice trying this out for the first time. The woman knew what she was doing. She had excellent credentials. She also never really abandoned tonality. And if you think about it, into the middle decades of the 20th century, there were a lot of composers who were straying farther and farther away from traditional harmony. Many of them adopted the 12-tone technique that was invented by and developed by Arnold Schoenberg, but there were plenty of composers who retained their connection to traditional tonal harmonies. She's one of them, but she wasn't afraid of dissonance, and I was fascinated as I got acquainted with this string quartet, the imaginative ways that she handled harmony.
Exactly, and also we were chatting before, I got to know her music through her solo violin works. In fact, she has a remarkable string quartet for 4 violins. We're not going to talk about it too much tonight, but I mean, if you think about 4 violins to actually play chamber music, it sounds like a horrible idea until you hear this piece of music, which sounds really, really good.
So you will see from your program page that the first movement of her quartet has 3 distinct parts to it. The andante that opens it is a slow introduction, and it's introducing a lot of the dense chromaticism that characterizes so much of her music. Let's listen to an excerpt from her slow introduction. It's, as I said, densely chromatic, but it's still anchored in tonality, and the parts are very closely written. The 4 strings are clustered together. Track 1, please. So you heard just in that brief excerpt, there were accelerandos, it's getting faster. She doesn't stick very long with one tempo. There are chronic tempo changes throughout this first movement.
I think it's rather improvisatory, but it has a really interesting structure, and it's so written for all of the instruments. You can really hear that the dichotomy between the lower and the upper strings works out beautifully. You've got no real problems with balance, and it looks like a really fun piece to play.
So our next example is from a little bit later on. Still in this first movement, you will hear those switches in tempo quite frequently, and this particular segment is dance-like, but it's still very dense in texture, by which I mean you're getting a quasi-orchestral sound from the strings, and they seem to be almost treading on each other in terms of the range they are. If it were at the piano, it would be in a very close range. May we hear track 2, please? There are a couple of things going on here. She has the violin way up top, the first violin, answered by a similar rhythmic figure in the cello way down below. Then she brings all 4 instruments together, and they're moving in what we call homophonic texture, which means everybody's proceeding at the same rhythm, but with a different pitch.
You know what's really interesting I want to draw your attention to is that there's a clarity about this. In many of her pieces that I know as well, including the solo pieces, that it's very similar to the music of Sam Barber in that you hear through all of the density. It's not, a cluster at all. You hear the density, but you also hear the clarity of her writing.
Barber's a very interesting comparison because I believe they were exact contemporaries.
And very different in education.
Very different in education, although Barber was among the most European of American composers of his generation. And I think he was at least trilingual. We know he spoke both Italian and English fluently, but I think he had a smattering of French.
At the time I was growing up,
as
he was just one of the great tune writers of all time, which I think is selling him short as a great composer.
Yes, okay. Now we're going to listen to an excerpt from her slow movement, which is very atmospheric. I was enchanted by the way she could create this mysterious, shadowy environment. It's very cinematic to me. I don't know that she missed her calling not writing for film, but I'm thinking that she would have been extremely effective as a TV or movie scorer. Let's listen to track 3, please, from the slow movement. Gary, tell us what's going on in the string writing there.
Well, it's really interesting. It has elements of Bartók, but it also has a lot of what we think of as musical pauses. In other words, the rests there are not meant to be silent, but you sing through the rests. So I have to say, I've not played this piece, but starting the score, it is a remarkably beautifully written piece of music. I mean, really, you can't take anything away. You can't really add anything.
And it is a special gift for a composer to be able to write rests, which are literally places where an instrument or more than one instrument takes a rest from playing. It's a silence, where the silence becomes as important as the sound and sort of casts an invisible spotlight. I know that's an oxymoron, but you'll work with me on this, on the music that you're about to hear.
For sure.
So moving on to later in the slow movement, she was very good at writing what we call imitatively. It's not necessarily a fugue, but what you're going to hear is the gestures echoing one another, possibly in a different register. This instrument plays it high, maybe the viola echoes it or brings it in with a different pitch level, and it's a little lower, but you'll recognize the rhythmic pattern. And then it starts to build and accelerate, and you'll hear her fragmenting that imitative gesture. She's kind of deconstructing it so that it might just be 2 notes instead of the 5 or 6 notes of the original gesture. Let's hear track 4, please. hear what I mean about the fragmenting? She had that one gesture, and then she just took the two notes from it, but she used that as part of the way to make the music gain in tempo. We call that accelerando.
I love this excerpt that you chose, because all of a sudden, for about a half a bar, you're in C sharp minor. And nobody knows that. I don't want you to listen for that. But I mean, the cool thing about it is that you are actually tonal, and then she takes it right away from you, so that you don't realize it consciously that you just maybe had an homage to the 19th century, and now you're back.
She doesn't let you settle into any key center for a long time. You could say the same thing about a much more conservative and earlier composer like Gabrielle Fauré, but she is handling harmony in a completely different way that I think is uniquely her own voice, and this woman very clearly had an individual voice. My last example from the Bacewicz is from the finale, which is the most overtly Polish movement of the three, and she uses a technique called hemiola. The example that I always use for this, it's more or less two confused with three. Think of Bernstein's America. I like to be in America. So we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And this is something that Brahms loved to do.
Absolutely.
It's a favorite ploy of a lot of composers. She uses it very effectively, and the whole movement is very witty and playful. It just shows us a different side of her personality. Let's listen to track 5, please. I'm reminded of that tune. I think it's from Annie, Get Your Gun. Anything you can do, I can do better.
Probably would have been writing Broadway if she lived a little longer.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, we're going to reverse, go back 2 centuries now to the end of the 18th century. Mozart needs no introduction, but we wanted to spend a little bit of time on this immortal clarinet quintet, not only because our friend Pierre Jalbert had a very high bar to look up to in writing for the same ensemble, but also because it is one of the most exquisitely balanced works in the entire chamber literature.
Yeah, and as a string player, I can tell you that though it's a clarinet quintet, and obviously Stadler, who we'll talk about, was the reason that we did this, that he did this. As a quintet, it also has some marvelous writing for all 4 instruments, which I think in Mozart's time was actually quite unusual because of the so-called solo instrument.
Well, we've talked about Stadler. Let's move ahead to the picture of him. He was the foremost clarinetist of his day, but he wasn't playing the modern clarinet. That instrument did not develop as we know it until about half past the 19th century. He was playing on an instrument that today we call a basset clarinet. I think in Stadler's day it would have been known as a basset horn.
Right.
We have a couple of pictures of them, and as you can see, it does not visually resemble the instrument that Romie de Guise-Langlois will be playing later on. Actually for the second 2/3 of the program, but it had a lower range that is known in the clarinet world by a French term called chalumeau, and it could play several keys lower than the modern clarinet. Some modern clarinets, it depends if you're a B-flat clarinet or an A clarinet, they can dip down to this lower register. But it took a while for this instrument and the modern clarinet to kind of find a happy meeting place. And Mozart wrote beautifully for that chalumeau register. He loved the sound of Stadler's playing. He was very definitely writing for the artist.
I think for us to remember the main difference between the modern clarinet and, of course, the basset horn is its ability to project. And one of the things that you'll hear in the last movement, we'll get to the variations. I mean, that can really cover the whole room. This is a perfectly sized room for this kind of a...
Let's run through these Mozart examples. The first statement, the clarinet's in that chalumeau register, then you'll hear it repeated in an upper register, and for the second entrance. But the strings will echo the melodic idea, but the clarinet's still first among equals. Track 6, please. the balance is just exquisite. The slow movement, there's no other words for it other than prayerful, ethereal, luminous. It just shimmers. It's just heavenly, really. Let's hear track 7, please. Those leaps that the clarinet was taking, they are straight out of opera.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that if it was on a string instrument, you guys would be watching people leap all over the place, but it's so effortless on a clarinet because you don't see them really move.
Indeed. All right, my next example is from the minuet, and what I want you to listen to is the flawless integration of the parts, the way Mozart has written this movement. Track 8, please. This work of Mozart is the only chamber music that he wrote with a wind instrument that has 4 movements. All the rest of them have 3 movements. And it has 2 trios, which is very unusual for Mozart. And it's a form that both Beethoven and Shulman would adopt frequently in the 19th century. My example is from the 2nd trio, which is more like the Austrian folk dancer, the Ländler, than it is a minuet. Track 9, please. The finale is a set of variations on a luminous theme. Again, it's perfectly symmetrical. The clarinet in the foreground. We're going to hear a little bit of variation 1, please. This is track 10. So I mentioned that the clarinet is first among equals. Let's listen to a little passage. This is from the variation 4. It's concerto-like and it showcases the clarinet's agility. Track 11, please. In the business, we say that those players have to have really good chops to be able to play.
Yeah, now these are hard licks.
Yes.
What I wanted to point out is, you've heard us many times say that chamber music back in the time of Mozart was something to entertain the amateurs and to really have fun with. This kind of a passage, I think, Mozart says to us, I don't care if you can play it. It's more important that Stadler could play it.
There you go. Okay, at this point, we would like to invite Pierre Jalbert to the lectern to join us and give us a little quick introduction. Please welcome Pierre. Give us a quick introduction to his clarinet quintet, which is called Equilibrium. Take it away, Pierre.
Sure. So, in writing music these days, I always think music should be about 2 things. It should be timeless, but it should also be about now. It should be about its own time. And, and thinking about what's going on these days, it seems like we live, and this has happened throughout history, there are certain times that we're living in an out of balance world. And so this piece is kind of about striving for equilibrium. And I discovered that almost every culture in the world has symbols for this idea of equilibrium. And if you just look at many of these, they all have a kind of symmetrical shape to them. So if you look at the first one there, the yin-yang, and if you go to the next slide, there's a slightly bigger picture of this. This is what I was sort of thinking about, this kind of give and take. And the first movement of this piece is actually kind of basically about this symbol. It's about two different kinds of music that go back and forth between this very still kind of music and a very animated kind of music.
Tell us what's happening in this first example we're going to hear.
So in the first movement, again, it's titled Still Animate. Basically, it starts out with very soft, placid sounds. And if you play track 1, it sounds like this. So you have the clarinet coming in almost from nothing. That's one thing I really wanted to take advantage of with the clarinet, is that it has this ability to do what we call niente beginnings, that is coming from nothing, niente, and also fading out into nothing. So from that string chord, it just sort of enters. And so I won't play it for you, but that's the still part. Then there's the animate part, which I'll wait till you'll hear that in the concert. But this music you just heard, along with this very animated, fast, rhythmic music, goes back and forth like the yin and yang symbol. And so it kind of creates this, this movement by a conversation through form in a way.
The second movement you've titled Chant, and I know that Gregorian chant, which is the way most of us became first acquainted with it, is something that's associated with medieval music, but it's been a source of influence, a source of inspiration to many composers throughout the Renaissance and the Baroque. You've turned to chant several times. How did it figure into this piece?
There's something about Gregorian chant. Well, in my own upbringing, I heard Gregorian chant sung in churches, but there's a certain longing in all of these beautiful chant melodies. And I wanted to take some of that and weave it into my own musical language and make it contemporary as well. So you'll hear this chant-like lines in the second movement, which then grow and move into a more contemporary language. But let's hear a little bit of that on the next track. So these kinds of lines go throughout this whole movement, and the clarinet adds into that too.
What about the drone that's going on, the open fifths of the
Yeah,
bottom
and
there?
that open fifth from medieval music, I use that a lot in my music too, and there's something about that grounds the whole thing. And you get a sense of tonality. It's not tonal in the way Mozart is tonal, but it has its own sense of tonal center.
Can I ask you a nuts and bolts question? So many people consider the clarinet and, let's say, the two violins very similar in range. How do you kind of solve that with the clarinet quintet, given the kind of texture you have in your music?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot to deal with when you're dealing with not just string quartet, but a solo instrument on top of that in the clarinet. I try to think about it in all the different ways that you can think about these 5 instruments. So you can think about them as a full ensemble. They can create a big sound just as playing all together. You can think about it as a soloist, clarinet soloist, versus the quartet. You can think about it as the quartet being a set of individuals who are also soloists, so you can have 5-voice counterpoint and everything in between. So I like to use lots of different kinds of textures and weave those in.
I know that you are a pianist originally, and I believe you told us that your wife is also a pianist, but you have a clarinet connection in the next generation, don't you?
Both of my sons were raised as clarinetists, so I heard, clarinet throughout the house all the time when they were growing up, whether we wanted to or not.
Perhaps we have another clarinet quintet in the future.
Yeah, maybe, we'll see. But it's certainly a sound I was very familiar with and one that I love, certainly. And I'll just go on to the third movement. The third movement is called Tipping Point, and as you might realize, this is referring to climate change. But not only climate change, it can be lots of tipping points in different kinds of issues, but I was specifically thinking of climate change in this. So the music in this movement is very frantic, very fast-paced, and it kind of pushes itself to the brink much of the time, with the clarinet sometimes functioning as a soloist, sometimes functioning as just another member of the ensemble. But let's listen to that track. So the clarinetist is kind of jumping all around, and the strings are creating this sort of frenetic motion, rhythmic motion throughout the piece.
Pierre, is this an ostinato or is it a dance? Sorry to be really nerdy about this.
I guess I think of it more as an ostinato, like this frantic figure pushing forward, always pushing forward.
Or a
with the
perpetual
rhythmic.
motion.
Perpetual motion, yeah.
And it can't be stopped. It's like a locomotive that would take a full mile to stop.
Yeah, and you're wondering, is it gonna ever fall off the cliff?
Let's hope not.
Hopefully not.
Explain to us the image that we're looking at on the screen here.
So this is just a way of sort of these are sort of these fractal images, and kind of trying to get to this idea of chaos versus equilibrium. But as I said, you'll hear in each one of these movements, I hope, the idea behind each one: still, animate, chant, and tipping point.
We're so excited to hear this. I just can't emphasize enough that to have Pierre and this commission on this stage for our audience is just such a thrill for me as artistic director. I know it'll be a thrill for you as an audience as well.
But before we conclude our proceedings this afternoon, Pierre, will you please tell the audience where this piece has already been performed and what you have learned from listening to the Dover Quartet and Romie de Guise-Langlois play it as they learned it and as it's evolved?
So yes, this was a co-commission by several groups, and it was first performed in Tucson, Arizona. Romie and the Dover Quartet were there as part of their this festival, their spring festival. And then it was performed at the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center in New York. And then in Houston with Chamber Music Houston, and now in Fort Worth. And for a composer, this is like, it's a dream to have all these performances built in. And for the performers as well, it helps them to really be able to present this in multiple cities for multiple audiences. And they've really grown with the piece as they've gotten to know it even better. A piece grows the more you perform it, the more it kind of gets into your psyche and gets into your soul.
Well, we should remind the audience, we've had experience with you with the piano quintet all the way back in 2017, which also was a multi-organization commission. So as presenters, I think we're very proud that it's a many times you're going to hear this even in their first incarnation. And then I can tell you something that you don't know yet, and that we're going to do the piano quintet again next year.
Oh, that's great news. Thanks.
Yeah.
Which is terrific, and you're close enough coming from Rice, where Pierre's on the faculty, so that maybe we'll have him with us again to give us insights into another one of his wonderful chamber works. Well, thank you very much for giving us that scintillating introduction. I know everyone's very eager to hear your piece as well as the Mozart and get an introduction to Grażyna Bacewicz. Thank you all this afternoon for being with us, and let's have another round of applause for Pierre Jalbert.
Thank you. Thank you.